Good evening and welcome to AOPA Air Safety Institute presents NTSB Insider Episode 3, Preventing Weather-Related Accidents. My name is John Collins and I am the Manager of Aviation Safety Programs and the Chief Flight Instructor for the Air Safety Institute, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Joining me tonight is Dr. Kristi Dunks, the Acting Deputy Director of Regional Operations for the NTSB, and she'll tell you a bit about herself in a moment. But before we begin, let me remind you to be sure that your volume is up. We are unable to troubleshoot any audio or video issues during the webinar, but we found that logging out and logging back in usually takes care of them. We are recording tonight's webinar and it will be available on our website at airsafetyinstitute.org/webinars tomorrow, and also on our YouTube channel. They'll probably be available on both by the late afternoon. We are also taking questions for our question and answer period at the end of the webinar, so please use the question function on your GoToWebinar control panel to submit those. For those of you that are on a laptop or desktop computer, you should see a question button on your right-hand side. If you're using a tablet or a smartphone, you'll see a question mark at the top of your screen. In either case, click or tap that to open the question feature. Type your question and hit send to submit it. Then you can tap or click it one more time to close it and continue viewing the presentation. Wings credit is available for this webinar, and if you signed up using your FAASafety.gov account email, you'll get that credit automatically. If you signed up with another email, or if you can't recall if you submitted your FAASafety.gov account email, please send it to us using the question feature. We'll make sure we add you to the list that we submit to the FAA. Finally, at the end of the program, I will talk to you about how you can get the AOPA Pilot Passport webinar badge and 1,000 points for attending tonight. Just stick around at the end after the Q&A and we'll go over that briefly so you can get that. And also we'll tell you how you can get a certificate of participation and credit in your ASI transcript. So again, I would like to thank Kristi Dunks for being with us tonight to help us look at preventing weather-related accidents. Kristi, you have the controls.
All right, thank you, John, and hello, everyone. I appreciate you joining us to talk about weather-related accidents. I've been at the NTSB for almost 20 years. I'm a pilot, as are many of my colleagues, and my airplane, a Piper Super Cub, was rebuilt by one of my early mentors at the NTSB, retired investigator George Peterson. I've been an investigator, an analyst, a business process manager, and I am currently in an acting role, overseeing our regional operations based throughout the United States. The NTSB also just so happened to make me an airplane owner, so I'm grateful for that. And I work out of Bozeman, Montana. The NTSB investigates all civil aviation accidents in the United States. Why do we investigate accidents? To determine the probable cause and prevent future accidents from occurring through voluntary industry actions or through the issuance of safety recommendations. For each investigation that we conduct, we issue a report that includes factual information, analysis, and a probable cause. In addition to our investigations, we also conduct special studies and support families that have been impacted by aviation accidents, as well as events in our other transportation modes. Tonight, I will discuss the NTSB, providing background on the Office of Aviation Safety, how we determine whether or not we will investigate, and the types of reports that we produce. I will then review data related to general aviation accidents, including personal flying, before highlighting accident data specific to weather-related accidents. We will then examine a case study involving an in-flight encounter with icing. The NTSB is a small government agency, and we make full and effective use of our available resources. Our board currently has 4 board members: Chair Jennifer Hamady, Vice Chair Bruce Landsberg, Board Member Michael Graham, and Board Member Tom Chapman. While our agency employs over 400 staff, the Office of Aviation Safety has about 120 staff members, and about 50 are regional aviation accident investigators. Our headquarters-based investigators that support general aviation accident investigations include air traffic control, meteorology, operations, engineering, human performance, survival factors, and airports. We also receive support from our Office of Research and Engineering through the NTSB's materials and recorder labs. In 2021, our office investigated over 1,200 domestic civil aviation accidents. Of those 1,200 civil aviation accidents, just over 1,100 of those were related to general aviation, and those accidents were investigated by our regional investigators. We currently have offices in Anchorage, Alaska, Federal Way, Washington, Denver, Colorado, and Ashburn, Virginia, with many of our investigators working from additional locations based throughout the United States. While many of you may know how the NTSB determines whether or not we will investigate an occurrence, it is information that all pilots should know, so I'm going to take a moment to review our criteria. How do we determine whether an occurrence is an accident? It is based on two criteria, injuries and/or damage, and we must have intent for flight. If a person suffers fatal or serious injuries as a result of an occurrence that had intent for flight, that is considered an accident. Fatal injuries are defined as any injury resulting in death within 30 days of an accident, and serious injuries are those that result in hospitalization for more than 48 hours, a fracture of any bone, severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage, injuries involving internal organs, or burn injuries. For damage, we look for damage that adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or flight characteristic of the aircraft and would normally require a major repair or replacement. You can see the list of exclusions there on the right. So I'll give you an example. If I am taxiing my Super Cub from my hangar to get fuel and the right wing strikes a post and is substantially damaged, there is no intent for flight. If I'm taxiing from the fueling area to the run-up area and that same thing happens, there is intent for flight, so this would be considered an accident. For damage or injuries, we always tell pilots that if you have a question, just contact us and we will work through the information and determine whether or not it is an accident. I would also like to mention that the NTSB occasionally conducts incident investigations. With incident investigations, typically the aircraft is in relatively good condition, so that if there is a safety issue related to the aircraft, the evidence is much more clear to document. I'll share a quick example. We were contacted by a Diamond DA-40 owner that found ball bearings from his propeller governor in his engine following a precautionary landing, and his engine was subsequently torn down. We elected to open an incident investigation and determined that the propeller governor came from a batch of governors that had been improperly manufactured. The manufacturer then issued a service bulletin. This was followed by an AD from the FAA that required that the propeller governors be examined and replaced if needed. Through this incident investigation, we were able to move the safety needle. One of the many interesting aspects to being an investigator is that the NTSB investigates all types of aircraft. We work with manufacturers to understand each type of aircraft we investigate. Helicopters, hot air balloons, single engine airplanes, we investigate all of them. If you need to report an accident, or if you have a question about an occurrence that may or may not be an accident, here are the best ways to contact us. You can reach our Response Operations Center that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by phone at 844-373-9922 or by email at notify@ntsb.gov. Now let's review our reports. Within the first 15 business days following an accident, we determine the scoping of the accident based on our classification system. The The accidents are classified 1 through 4, with 1 being the most complex investigation. For our least complex investigations, Class 4, those investigations do not have a preliminary report, but are completed within about 6 months. For Class 1 through 3 investigations, we will issue a preliminary report within 15 business days of the accident. This provides information we have initially obtained for the investigation. Then the factual and probable cause reports are released, typically between 6 to 18 months following an accident, with some stretching to 2 years or more. Additionally, if safety issues are identified, we may work with industry to adopt change to improve safety. For many general aviation investigations, this can take the form of voluntary changes completed by the operator or manufacturer to improve safety. An example would be an airport updating signage at the airport as a result of an accident. For those cases that identify significant safety issues, we will issue a safety recommendation. Safety recommendations are formal recommendations to enact change within the industry. The safety recommendation report you see here is one we issued last December related to the use of electronic carbon monoxide detectors in airplanes. Now that we have the background about the NTSB, let's take a look at some accident data. This chart is showing the top accident categories based on the defining event of the accident from 2012 to 2021. Fatal accidents are in red and non-fatal accidents are in yellow. You can see that most fatal accidents involved loss of control in flight, followed by system component failure, power plant, and controlled flight into terrain. For non-fatal accidents, loss of control on the ground, abnormal runway contact, and system component failure, power plant are the top categories. Now let's take a look at where these accidents occur. By far, the majority of accidents occur during landing. When we look at fatal accidents, though, most of these accidents occur during maneuvering, en route, approach, or the initial climb phases of flight. As we break this down further into personal flight accident categories, loss of control in flight still has the largest number of overall and fatal accidents, followed by system component failure, power plant, controlled flight into terrain, and unintended flight into IMC for the fatal accidents. The phases of flight where these accidents occur are typically landing accidents overall, and for fatal accidents, the en route, maneuvering, approach, and initial climb phases have the most fatalities. Now let's focus in exclusively on weather-related accidents. In a review of accidents from 2008 to 2020, we found that 22% of all accidents were weather-related, and of the fatal accidents, 27 were weather-related. Annually, there are about 300 weather-related accidents, and about 64 of those are fatal. When we look at the weather-related findings for accidents, you can see adverse winds are noted in the majority of accidents. However, it's important to note that when we look at low ceiling and low visibility accidents, they are typically almost always fatal. You can see the red line on the chart is similar in length to the blue line there. If we look at all accidents, of the 22% of those that are weather related for non-fatal events, the highest number results from adverse wind, followed by low ceilings and visibility and carburetor icing. When we look at overall fatal accidents, the 27% of weather-related fatal accidents involve low ceilings and visibility, density, altitude, and adverse wind. An important item to note is that accidents in IMC account for 4% of the fatal accidents, but account for over 53% of the weather-related accidents. Now let's move into the case study. Before we work our way into this investigation, I would like to take a moment to remind everyone that the purpose of reviewing an accident is not to associate blame with those involved, but to try to understand how we might end up in similar circumstances and how best to prevent this from happening. In this accident, a pilot and his family tragically lost their lives. This accident happened 16 years ago, yet we continue to see similar preventable events. On October 25th, 2006, the NTSB was notified that a Cirrus SR-22 had disappeared from radar while on an IFR flight plan. A search commenced for the airplane, and it was located in remote desert terrain north of the Grand Canyon. We began gathering information while preparing to launch to the accident site. We were told that the pilot had departed from South Lake Tahoe Airport and was destined to land at the Grand Canyon Airport. The pilot had departed late morning, and the airplane disappeared from radar at 12:08 Mountain Standard Time. The pilot was a private pilot with an instrument rating. We were advised that the pilot had contacted flight service to file an instrument flight plan. After the plan was filed, the pilot was asked if he needed any additional services. The pilot made the statement you see here. There was no record of the pilot obtaining a weather briefing for the flight. A fixed base operator employee working at the airport said that the pilot had arrived the day prior. The airplane was secured, and the pilot returned the following morning and found frost on the airplane. The pilot and his family waited as the sun rose and melted the frost. The employee said that the weather conditions were very good with clear skies. The investigation team included investigators from the NTSB, in addition to Cirrus, Ballistic Recovery Systems, AmSafe, Continental Motors, and the FAA. As the team prepared to launch to the site, an air traffic control investigation and review was underway. The purpose of the Air Traffic Control Group was to review the flight service station and air traffic control services. As I mentioned previously, the pilot had contacted flight service to file a flight plan, but did not request any additional weather information. Unfortunately, when the flight service specialist entered the information, the wrong date was entered. When the pilot departed and requested to open his flight plan with the Oakland Air Route Traffic Control Center, they could not locate it. The pilot then advised the air traffic controller that he could fly VFR, and he was provided with VFR flight following. At 10:52, the controller asked the pilot if he was familiar with the Nellis Air Force Base Restricted Area Complex. The pilot advised he was not familiar, and the controller suggested a route for the pilot to fly to avoid the restricted area while on his way to his destination. At 11:06, the aircraft was handed off and switched to the LA Air Route Traffic Control Center. After the communication transfer was complete, the controller made a broadcast over the sector frequencies stating that a convective SIGMET was valid for Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. About 1 minute later, the pilot made initial contact with another controller. At 11:22, the controller lost radar contact with the aircraft and told the pilot that he had lost radar contact and that radar services were terminated. The controller provided the pilot with an approach control frequency and suggested that the pilot attempt to contact the Las Vegas terminal radar approach control in about 40 miles. The pilot continued to fly VFR to his destination. At 11:47, the pilot contacted the LA sector controller and was told to stand by. During this time, the radar associate for the controller received a call from a controller who had asked if the radar controller was looking for the airplane. The approach controller advised that the pilot would be calling LA Center. At 11:49, the Nellis Air Traffic Control Facility called to advise that they were tracking a 1200 beacon code that had flown through the Nellis Air Force Base restricted airspace. The Nellis controller asked for help in tracking the aircraft to the Grand Canyon, which they believed to be the destination. At 11:50, the controller asked the pilot for his request. And the pilot said, "I have a lot of weather in front of me, clouds. I'm VFR approaching IFR. I'm trying to get to the Grand Canyon, so I need to advise here because if I go, I can lower than just go around the mountains, but I'd rather if we could somehow pick up an IFR clearance to Grand Canyon. It would be great." The controller asked the pilot for his current location. The pilot said 30 miles northeast of Las Vegas. At 11:51, the controller issued the pilot a transponder code. 11:52, the controller radar identified the aircraft and about 1 minute later provided an IFR clearance to the Grand Canyon Airport stating, "You're cleared to Grand Canyon Airport via present heading, expect radar vectors direct, climb and maintain 1000, and the pilot acknowledged the clearance. At 11:53, the pilot reported that he may need to deviate around weather with a cell about 20 miles in front of the airplane. The controller confirmed the location of the weather cell and asked the pilot whether he wanted to go left or right around the cell, and then approved the pilot's request to go right. According to recorded data, the thunderstorm activity was 15 miles wide and in the accident aircraft's 11 o'clock through 3 o'clock position, moving southeast bound. The data indicated that there was more than one weather intensity being shown. Also, the controller was aware of a pilot report that an aircraft had encountered moderate icing at 13,000 feet north of the pilot's location. At 11:55, the controller advised the pilot of traffic, and he reported seeing it on his scanner, but that he was going through the clouds, so he was unable to acquire it visually. At 11:56, the pilot requested a climb to 13,000 feet. However, the controller was unable to improve the altitude change and said, "I'll have higher as soon as that traffic is clear of you." The pilot acknowledged. At 11:57, a controller from Nellis called and provided a contact phone number and asked the controller to instruct the pilot to call after landing for a possible pilot deviation report. At 11:59, the controller instructed the pilot to climb and maintain 13,000 feet. In addition, the pilot was informed about a possible pilot deviation and was provided the phone number to call after landing. The pilot advised the controller that he had a weather cell coming up in front of him and requested a 10-degree deviation to the right. The controller approved the deviation and said, "Direct to Grand Canyon when able," and the pilot acknowledged. At 12:07 and 10 seconds, according to recorded radar data, a minimum safe altitude warning, or MSAW, activated on the controller's radar display. The warning began when the aircraft descended towards 12,000 feet, which exceeded the MSAW parameters for that area. For 84 seconds, the aircraft's altitude was varying between 12,000 to 12,700 feet, and the minimum altitude in the area was 9,000 feet MSL. At 12:07 and 22 seconds, the pilot transmitted his call sign twice. At 12:07 and 36 seconds, after the controller acknowledged the pilot's transmission, the pilot said, "We have an emergency. We have ice everywhere, picking up ice." The controller asked the pilot if he wanted to climb, and the pilot said, "No, ma'am, we're out of the clouds right now and in front of us. I'm trying to get out of the clouds." At 12:07 and 59 seconds, the controller replied, "Just descend at your discretion and let me know when you can level off." At 12:08 and 37 seconds, the pilot responded, "Ice everywhere, 1 Lima Delta 1. The controller replied, Roger, just descend to get out of the ice and let me know what altitude you can descend to. At 12:08 and 55 seconds, the controller instructed the pilot to maintain 9,000 feet, but there were no further communications from the pilot. The last recorded radar return was at 12:09 and 11 seconds, and the airplane's altitude was not recorded. Here is an aerial view of the airplane wreckage at the accident site. The team responded to the accident site and we began our documentation of the wreckage, working through the control systems and ensuring that all of the wreckage was within the accident site area. Additionally, we began our documentation of the Cirrus airframe parachute system to determine whether or not it had been deployed during flight or if it had been deployed due to ground impact. The parachute was out of its enclosure, and the rocket and the deployment bag were located approximately 288 feet east of the main wreckage. Shards of plexiglass were located near the fuselage. The activation cable was continuous from the activation handle aft through the fuselage to the rocket igniter. In this case, the evidence supported the parachute deploying as a result of ground impact. The pilot's personal flight logbook was examined at the accident site. The entries in the logbook were dated from July 1996 to October 2006. Excluding the last 4 entries that were for future planned flights, the pilot's total log time was about 892 hours. The pilot obtained an instrument rating in July of 2005, which equated to his most recent flight review. The pilot had accrued about 384 hours in the accident airplane. In the pilot's logbook, he logged almost all flights in the accident airplane under actual instrument conditions. An accurate estimate of his actual instrument flight time could not be determined. From April 25th to 29th, 2006, the pilot logged a trip in the southeast United States, and in the remarks section, he noted that thunderstorms were encountered. The pilot also attended the Cirrus transition course at the Cirrus factory from November 15th to 21st, 2005. After completing our on-site examination, the aircraft was recovered and we conducted further examinations of the engine, aircraft controls, and systems. Airplane was manufactured in 2005. The pilot purchased the airplane from the factory in November of 2005. He had previously owned a Cessna 172M, which his logbook indicated was purchased in June 2004. Federal Aviation Administration records showed that the pilot sold the Cessna 172 on April 15, 2005. The engine was examined and we determined that there were no catastrophic engine failure or other issues that would have resulted in a loss of power in flight. In addition, we traced the control systems throughout the airplane. We also documented the aircraft systems, including the anti-ice system for the airplane. Components of the anti-ice system were examined and tested, and no in-flight anomalies were identified. You can see the system on the test bench in the picture here on the left. The TKS switches in the cockpit were on and in the max flow positions. The system was certified as a non-hazardous system, indicating that the system is provided as a means of escape during inadvertent icing encounters. Meteorological data for the flight was reviewed by an NTSB meteorologist. The northern half of Arizona was forecast to have cloud layers from 7,000 to 8,000 feet broken and 11,000 feet broken, and cloud tops at 14,000 feet. After 1300, winds were forecast to be westerly at 17 knots, gusting to 27 knots. Additionally, there were air vents for icing approximately 65 nautical miles northeast of the accident site and moderate turbulence within the accident site area. A convective sigment was issued for an area encompassing the accident site. Area thunderstorms were moving from 290 degrees at 20 knots with cloud tops at 28,000 feet MSL. And of course, if convective sigment implies severe or greater turbulence, severe icing, and low level wind shear. This is a radar view showing the storm line relative to the accident site here. The airplane was equipped with onboard weather. Information related to the convective sigment and the radar display showing the convective activity was available to the pilot. However, it is unknown what information the pilot was viewing. Comparison of the weather radar data available to the pilot using the airplane's onboard weather display and recorded weather radar information obtained following the accident showed that the images available on the pilot's weather display did not compare exactly with the radar images obtained by the safety board meteorologist. Both the recorded radar and pilot's radar display showed similar locations of precipitation, but the pilot's display lacked some of the lighter precipitation in the area at the time. This image shows a view from the in-cockpit weather provider and how the line of thunderstorms would have been shown to the pilot if he was viewing the information in flight. The airplane was equipped with an Avidyne primary flight display and multifunction display. Data from the MFD and PFD were retrieved and sent to our recorder lab for review. The last 13 minutes of the recording showed a climb from a pressure altitude of 10,900 feet at an average rate of 500 feet per minute, and the airspeed decreased from 147 knots. About 5 minutes later, the altitude leveled at 12,900 feet, and the airspeed began increasing. Throughout the climb and 1 minute after the level off, multiple changes in roll were displayed, ranging from 45 degrees right to 35 degrees left. Approximately 1 minute after the level off, a 360-degree turn was begun that included changes in pressure altitude between about 12,000 and 13,300 feet, indicated airspeed between approximately 160 and 62 knots, pitch altitude between approximately 30 degrees nose up and 25 degrees nose down, and vertical speed between approximately 5,200 positive and 6,300 negative feet per minute. During the last minute of flight, the indicated airspeed decreased to 68 knots and a left roll was indicated with a rapidly changing magnetic heading. Over this time period, the indicated airspeed stabilized at an average of 118 knots and vertical speed stabilized at an average of negative 6,700 feet per minute. At the last recording, the pressure altitude was 5,074 feet and the vertical speed was negative 7,208 feet per minute. Here's a closer view of the last portion of the flight, and you can see the changes of magnetic heading and the significant vertical speed of the airplane. This data was consistent with the airplane entering a spin. We had no evidence that the pilot attempted to activate the Cirrus airframe parachute system, although activation of the system is the only approved recovery of the airplane after its entry into a spin. Additionally, to further support our engine examination findings, we found that the engine data parameters showed during the majority of the flight the engine was operating at approximately 2,500 RPM. About 1.5 minutes prior to the end of the recording, the engine RPM varied between 1,910 and 2,690 RPM. During the last 30 seconds of recorded data, the RPM averaged 2,500. In a previous NTSB study, in 41% of the weather-related accidents, the pilot did not obtain or received an inadequate weather briefing. The FAA provides comprehensive guidance material on how to obtain a pre-flight weather briefing and the different types of information available. If you want to learn more about interpreting National Weather Service products, this document from of Aviation Weather Services is a great reference guide on reading and interpreting weather products. In the case of the accident pilot, we do not know what information he was using in the cockpit as he entered the area with the active thunderstorms. However, it is important to remember that weather radar designed to help avoid isolated storms should not be used to penetrate lines. With NextRad imagery, information can also be delayed 5 to 20 minutes so that you are not seeing the most current storm movement. And a reminder from the AIM, avoid any severe thunderstorms by 20 miles or more. So let's review certain events that occurred along this accident chain that on their own may not have resulted in an accident. As the links of the chain came together, there was a point in which the accident could no longer be avoided. As we go through these events, think about in your own flying how you might recognize these links to avoid an accident. The pilot called flight service to file a flight plan, and they made an error in entering the information. This was really out of his control. The specialist also asked if he would like weather information, but he declined. Whether the pilot thought that the beautiful weather at his departure point would be similar to his destination for the 2.5-hour flight, we do not know. When the pilot asked the controller to activate his flight plan, the controller could not pull it up because of the entry error. At this point, the pilot chose to continue the flight with VFR flight following. This increased his workload due to his unfamiliarity with the area. As the pilot was being transitioned between controllers, a broadcast of the convective segment was transmitted and covered the planned route of flight. Finally, the pilot sees the weather in front of the airplane, requests IFR, and as he is entering the busiest phase of this flight, the controller advises him that he flew through a restricted area and would need to make a phone call upon landing. When looking back after the accidents, these opportunities to break the accident chain become clear. As pilots, it is important that we learn to recognize these times in the moment so that we can stop the accident before it occurs. We need to always have a bailout plan that includes when we're going to initiate it and how we're going to initiate it. For pilots involved in accidents, sometimes that moment of recognition may come too late. And here are some final tips I offer from one of our NTSB senior meteorologists. Always get a pre-flight briefing. It is important to begin our flights with the best information available. There is no reason to wait until later. Having a clear understanding of the weather picture prior to departure will allow for more effective decision-making en route. Weather changes, and we need to get updates along our route of flight. It is important to recognize that weather and forecast change, and getting weather updates along your route of flight will make you aware of potentially hazardous weather, letting you make the safest decisions possible for your flight. When you encounter weather, file a PIREP. Help other pilots avoid difficult weather. Pilots are a simple way to share information along your route of flight. Finally, maintain currency and fly like a professional on every flight. We can't just fly like a professional on every other flight or even every flight that is convenient, but every single flight. Here are some different ways to connect with the NTSB. And if you would like to go directly to our aviation resources, you can scan this QR code here. And from that, I am happy to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Kristi. That was a very, very good briefing. Appreciate that. An interesting accident to look at and see what happened there. And I guess, would you, one of the questions that we got early on was asking about how deep into the root cause do you investigate with small plane accidents? I guess you would say in this particular accident, would you say that the root cause is the failure to get a full weather briefing, or was there something else maybe further along the line that was really the cause of the accident?
So as far as the probable cause of this accident, we attributed it primarily to the pilot's inadequate weather evaluation for the flight. And then we had some limitations as far as the air traffic control services and flight service specialists providing information to the pilot during the flight. Now, when we're looking at the depth that we go to in our investigations, of course, we ask why, and we continue along that path to determine if we have any safety issues involved, and get to that probable cause point.
Okay. Alton wrote, and he has a question. Says he's not familiar with that entire area, but in your opinion, as a pilot and as a flight instructor, could the pilot have remained under the clouds and made it to his destination?
That's a great question, and really not. That wasn't something we evaluated, where it was different paths that the pilot could have taken during the flight. In this particular case, due to the extensive nature of the buildup of the storm, the safest option for the pilot would have been to have possibly diverted and landed at an airport earlier rather than continuing on to his destination.
We have another question here. How many safety recommendations does the NTSB actually make a year? And of those, how many do the FAA adopt? I think that's been a little bit of a bone of contention between the two agencies. You guys make a number of recommendations that the FAA seems to be slow sometimes to act on. But how many do you do in a year?
Yeah, so the number of safety recommendation varies depending on kind of what safety issues we're investigating and the scope and scale of the accidents that we're looking at. And so I would say it can range from the teens of 15 up to, I know there's some years we've issued over 50. So it really just depends on the type of events we're investigating. Now, the question about these recommendations and does the FAA respond to these recommendations? They absolutely do. And we have very good discussions with the FAA on our safety recommendations. Now, if a safety issue gets to the level of a safety recommendation, it's a significant safety issue and may require regulatory change. Now, all of us in the aviation industry know what a long-term process regulatory change can be. Right. And so when we're looking at time, that really can impact the FAA's ability to respond quickly to our recommendations. And of course, they also occasionally have competing priorities come into play.
Francis writes that self-briefing seems to be the new norm with tools like ForeFlight, and viewing graphical forecast information is so much more instructive than talking to someone on the phone and trying to visualize the situation. I remember that's what it was like when I first started to learn how to fly. I'd call up the 800 number and try to picture all the information the briefer was telling me. If I was lucky, I'd walk over to the weather station and look at the charts in person. But what are your thoughts on the online briefing process? How do you think that works? Do you think that is a good way to do it?
Yes, I learned in a similar environment, right, where
Yeah.
you're learning all of the codes and trying to understand the talk, right, that's given to you. And so pilots now, we have many resources available to us. I think the important thing to remember is that we just have to make sure that we're getting a full and accurate account for the flight, and that the weather information that we're getting is current and pertinent to our route of flight. And also that we update that information, right, as we're, especially on a cross country flight where we're transitioning over a long distance, we need to reach out and make sure we're getting that updated information.
Right. Yeah. We have a request, if you wouldn't mind, Kristi, going back, I think maybe a slide or two. They were looking for the contact information with the phone numbers and the links. Can you pull that up again?
Sure. If you scan this code or with your phone, that will bring us to ntsb.gov/air. You can also type that in your browser, or see here. There we go. So these are the different channels we have on all the different social media accounts.
Okay. All right. Another question related to the case study. Were you able, or could you estimate the altitude at which the aircraft entered the spin? Was that discernible from the data that you were able to look at?
Yeah, it was right at that point as it entered that turn. Let me see what the exact altitude was. It was right around that 12,000 foot level as I was describing the information that we obtained from the onboard displays.
Okay. Related to getting updated weather as we're going along, Barry asked the question, without weather radar in the cockpit, what's the best way to get weather updates in flight? ATC does not like it when you go off frequency.
Sure. Well, I think if you need to get that weather information, of course, ask if that's an option. There are many apps available now, right? My Super Cub does not have a glass panel, but there are many apps that I can use if I need to get those weather updates during flight.
Yeah. There's a comment about the pilot in the flight that he could have refiled his IFR flight plan, and then he would have had the assistance of ATC in avoiding weather, going around it, and then going direct to Grand Canyon. What were his options for refiling IFR? Do you think he would have been able to do that? I know that's a little bit of speculation, but you know, it sounded like at one point he was kind of put on hold by ATC for a little bit. So maybe not, but
yeah. So when the pilot asked to open his IFR flight plan and was told it wasn't in the system, there was some discussion about him creating an IFR flight plan, and then the pilot ended up offering to fly VFR. Whether that was because of the weather in his immediate area, I'm not sure, you know, just to make it easier in that exchange with the controller, but the pilot had offered that. Now, he absolutely could have probably figured out a way to communicate with the controller, but you know, we just know kind of they had initiated that discussion, and then the pilot had offered to do VFR flight following.
We had a couple questions related to the ballistic parachute system, and in the investigation, I think you said that it looked like it had not actually been deployed, but it had in flight and had deployed upon impact with the ground. And there were some questions about whether the pilot might not have been able to pull the handle, or you know, did he not realize that he was in a spin and needed to pull the handle, or Do you think perhaps, would he have been able to break out from under the clouds, find himself in the spin, and not be able to react immediately to pull that handle? A lot of good questions, a lot of what ifs in there, but
absolutely. So with the system, that's part of our examination of the system on scene. We want to make sure that in addition to answering that question of where and when did it deploy, we also need to make sure that the system was deployable. So part of our investigation and examinations, we look at the linkage between that handle and the rocket and how that is all interconnected and would function. And so we did not find any anomalies with that system that the pilot should have been able, had he chosen to pull the chute. Now, as we discussed during the investigation, things got very busy right at the end, and he also had the added dreaded call to make a phone call upon landing for a possible pilot deviation. So we're not able, right, to understand why he didn't pull the chute, but it was a very busy time, and I can imagine it was very overwhelming. I know I would have been as a pilot.
Right. Yeah, me too. Absolutely. There's a question from Rivka wants to know, are all accident investigations reported publicly? And I believe they are posted on your website once they're complete, and that sometimes takes a while, a year, maybe 2 years, depending on the details needed to get a good report out there. And he asked, is there a reason to hold the information from the public? And I don't think there really is. So you guys do a very good job of reporting that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so we have a database. All of the information we produce is public. We're a public agency, right? So of the investigations that we do each year, they are all published on our website. And so we have a database called Carroll Tool, and you link to it right through our website. Now, in addition, when you look at these accident reports, there's also an item called the docket that's linked within each report. And the docket contains all of the supporting documentation for the accident. So have the accident report, and then the docket would contain things like photographs, exam reports, things like that. And all of that is contained there and free, that you click on the links and it opens the PDFs and right there.
Sort of a follow-up question to that, we have another, Steve asked if he wanted to learn more about accidents in his area using Carroll, is he able to, kind of specify a state or a region or something like that?
Absolutely. Yes, you can specify date range, location. If you want to find out if you fly particular aircraft type and you want to see all the accidents related to that aircraft type, you can search by that. So yes, whatever sort of specifics you're looking for, you can input that into the query tool and it will provide you with a list of related accidents. And I would like to say too, if you have a more complicated request that it doesn't appear that you can get to through the query tool, we do have analysts at our agency that can help you get the data that you're looking for.
Okay. All right. Lots of questions coming here, trying to sort through them and see where we can get some here. There is here. Well, there's a comment made here by somebody who's done some accident investigation both for the state police and the FAA, that one of the largest reasons for an accident to occur is some of the social pressures. I know we've talked about that in other webinars and talked about it in dealing with pilot mental health, that we have a lot of external pressures that can creep up on a pilot. Of course, if you're flying with passengers, you have their expectations, you have your expectations as a pilot to complete the flight. Although I will say this, there's There is no, and I've said this before, there is no general aviation flight that I must make. So if I'm getting a weather briefing and I'm looking at it and it exceeds my personal minimums or the standards that I've set for that particular flight, I'm not going to go. And I'll tell my passengers that, and I'll deal with it on the ground, not having to worry about it in the air. So there are definitely pressures that pilots feel, and some of that stuff, you may not be able to see that in the accident investigation unless you can get some sort of recording that has some of that information audible in there. But
absolutely. As part of our investigations, of course, we talk with friends and family members and try to understand the circumstances surrounding the flight. Were they going to an event and things like that? But absolutely, going back to what you said of going into the flight with a plan, that if these things change, this is my plan, and not having to make those decisions when you have the pressure of the event you're trying to get to, or other pressures, right? Kind of clouding your decision making. Make them on the ground and then keep them going during the flight.
And I think you also said, talking about in the flight, having some points along the way to reevaluate and look at the decisions, and is it going according to plan? Do I need to make a deviation? Do I need to turn around? Do I need to land? Do I need to ask for more help? That's important to have that factored in there, and not just fly along thinking everything's good until you look outside and know everything really isn't good. And I don't think it crept on them that quickly, but I think, like you said, having a good pre-flight weather briefing would have given him a bit more information to make some better decisions prior to getting as far into the flight as they did before they started asking for help. And one last question here. I think we'll end with this one. This is a good question. Catherine wants to know, will the NTSB be hiring additional regional investigators in 2022 and 2023? Do you guys need some more help?
Absolutely. So and thank you for asking. So we post all of our openings on usajobs.gov, and all of the requirements are listed there. We do not currently have any openings, but we will soon. And so you can watch there and even create a search. So they'll email you when a job is posted.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Kristi. Really appreciate that. And as promised, folks, I'm going to show you how you can get some goodies for watching this webinar and participating in it. We thank you for that. First of all, you can get a AOPA ASI webinar badge. So if you use the AOPA Pilot Passport program, the app on your iPhone, you can go there, and if you look on the screen, you'll see you can either click on the Pilot Passport logo under the quick launch, or you can go up into the upper left-hand corner and tap on the menu. When that opens up, go to My Pilot Passport, number 3 there, and then once you've opened that up, go down to the bottom of that page, number 4, click on Redeem the Affiliate Code, and then you can type in the code that you see in bold at the top of the screen here, ASI Web 091522. Again, ASI WEB 091522. That's actually available until October 31st. So by all means, please do that. Once you type that in, go ahead and tap the green bar to redeem the code, and you'll be able to do that. So I click the screen here. We talked about getting a certificate of participation or completion by entering. You can enter this URL on your browser, take a screenshot of it. It's bit.ly/NTSB-insider3 cert, and that will add that to your ASI transcript. Additionally, and I know we've had a number of you submit this to us, thank you very much. If you participate in the WINGS program and you want to get WINGS credit for viewing this webinar, please provide your FAAsafety.gov WINGS account email to us. Hopefully you registered with it when you registered for the webinar, but if you didn't, go ahead and submit it by entering it into the question form on your screen, and we'll be able to take care of it for you there. Again, if you forget or you can't get to it, or you don't remember that, just send me an email at john.collins, COLLINS, @aopa.org, and I'll be happy to get you that credit. want to thank you for coming. As you may know, that all of our work is funded through donations to the AOPA Foundation. If you are interested in supporting our work at the Air Safety Institute, please go to aopafoundation.org and click on the donate button. There are a number of different ways you can make that donation. And when you do, just take the option for safety, and that will make sure that we get some funding to help us in our safety education. All the programs that we do, the webinars, our accident case studies, early analysis videos, real pilot stories, online courses, all of that is funded through the generous donations by pilots and aviation enthusiasts like yourself, and we really appreciate that. If by any chance you are not a member of AOPA and you enjoyed this webinar and you'd like to become a member of the largest general aviation organization in the world and enjoy all the benefits of being an AOPA pilot, please join us at aopa.org/join today. We'll be happy to show you how you can become a part of the AOPA family and enjoy all the benefits that come along with that, including our website, magazines, lots of cool stuff like that. So on behalf of the Air Safety Institute, on behalf of Kristi and the NTSB and myself, thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate it. We hope to continue the NTSB series in the 2023 season, so look for information coming out on that. We'll work to bring you some more interesting and exciting accident case studies and looking at a deep dive into what happened in some of these accidents so we can figure out how we can avoid making the same mistakes and being better pilots ourselves. The next ASI safety webinar will be on October 20th. We'll be at 7 o'clock Eastern on the 20th, and that is our third and final installment in our Flight Deck Tech series. So come join us and we'll take a look at some interesting new developments in avionics and flight deck tech. So thank you again for watching, and everybody have a good night and fly safe.